We're going to talk a bit about testing today, particularly A/B testing in your email marketing campaigns. I'm Jamie, he's James, we're from the Inbox Club. Let's get into it.
Just clap.
Okay. You ready? Okay. Right. Yeah, we covered. Yeah, I nailed the clap. Yeah, we're clapping between like takes here, so you're missing that, but it's a real joy. Okay, so we covered subject lines, we covered personalization. They're kind of like the sexy part of email marketing, right?
Doesn't say a lot for email marketing,
No,
does it?
it doesn't. But we're about to get very non-sexy now, right? Because we're going to talk more about the science of email marketing.
The minger of email.
The minger of email marketing. Can you still say minger? Is that still
No.
okay? Well, it's not cool to say it anymore, but I like it. We can use that. But anyway, the minger of email marketing is testing, right? And please don't switch off at this point because it is important, and we are going to keep it short and sweet and entertaining. And there's going to be some juice in here, so stay tuned. And people will talk about A/B testing and multivariate testing, right? And it's obviously something that we do a lot because people are paying us a lot of money to do email marketing. So it's something that we have baked into our offer. It is the science behind email marketing, and it's the stuff that people don't necessarily see. And because of that, it's something that people might not appreciate as much as when we write great subject lines or when we write great copy. People don't necessarily attribute the fact that their open rates and their clicks might have gone up or their conversions might have gone up, and might not attribute that to the fact that it's because of the testing strategy that we've used, right? So if you were going to sum up, I guess I already did a little bit there, but if you were going to sum up why someone should take on testing like tomorrow, why should they do that? Why should they spend the time? Because one thing that we see a lot with email marketing is that people don't have the time and they don't do their newsletter or their email marketing justice because they're short on time. So why should they invest that time that they don't have into testing?
Yeah, I think email testing is sort of a dream for marketers because usually marketing on most platforms is shrouded in mystery. There's that famous saying, 50% of marketing works, you just don't know which 50% it is. And email testing is different because it allows us to verifiably prove that what we're doing either works or doesn't work, and which variations of two subject lines are going to be more successful. So it's very unusual in marketing that you're able to objectively measure the effectiveness of your hypotheses. I think this CTA will work better than this CTA, or I think this subject line will work better than this subject line, and actually have verifiable evidence that reinforces or disproves that hypothesis. So firstly, I'd say that that is a rare opportunity that we should take advantage of, and we shouldn't take that for granted. Secondly, I would say that it's really easy to do basic testing, and there is plenty of discussion to be had about how far down the rabbit hole do we go when it comes to testing. But on a top level, most email service providers, including even your entry-level ones like MailChimp, will give you functionality to A/B test certain elements, whether it's send time or subject line. So there's really no excuse not to. And thirdly, you mentioned great copy and great design, and those being maybe the sexier parts of email marketing. Every single great bit of copy in an email that we write, at least, or every great element of design that we put together for a client is there because we've A/B tested. So we know what works and what doesn't, and we can use those findings to inform that great copy. So every time you don't test after sending an email, you are losing an opportunity to learn something about your audience that you didn't know before.
Okay. And if someone's going to say, okay, James just dropped some pure fire there on why I should be testing, I want to start tomorrow. What, in terms of like, as a beginner, as an amateur, as someone who's not tested before, specifically for email marketing, what's something that they can test that's really easy straight away?
Send time,
Send
right
time.
off the bat, easy peasy. And there's some really clever functionality now. I'll use MailChimp again, not necessarily the biggest fan of MailChimp, but it's if MailChimp has it, you know that basically every other email service provider is going to have it, right?
Yeah, sure.
And they have smart sending now. So not only can you A/B test your send time, but you can also set your sends such that they send at different intervals depending on what time zone your recipient is in. Which, if we have location data about our recipients, can be really, really powerful. Because if I'm sending it at 5 p.m. for someone who lives in England, it might be 3 in the morning for the recipient who lives in China,
Of
for
course.
example.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as far as A/B testing goes, I would say an entry-level test is send time. Does your email perform better if you send it on a Friday afternoon compared to a Tuesday afternoon? Maybe it performs better on a Sunday. It probably won't, by the way, because Sunday is pretty much widely regarded as the worst day to send emails.
Yeah.
But you get the idea. We don't know this for sure. Maybe your list is different, and maybe they do like to open their emails on a Sunday.
Yeah.
We will only know this through A/B testing. So I'd say send time's a really easy one. Subject line is also a really easy one. We've touched on this a little bit already.
Yeah.
Are you using emojis versus not using emojis? I would say an important rule to bear in mind, no matter what you want to start experimenting with first, is to start with the hypothesis. So say to yourself, I think my audience will respond better if I start using emojis in my subject lines. And then build your testing around that hypothesis and prove it right or prove it wrong. And it's okay to be wrong. I mean, that's awesome. If you're wrong about your hypothesis, you've learned something that surprised even you about your audience. So in a sense, like, the more wrong you are, the better in this regard. But start with your hypothesis. Maybe it's, I think that more of my audience are going to open my emails if I send them on a Friday afternoon compared to a Wednesday afternoon. And make that hypothesis, do the test, and remember to jot down your findings and actually use them. Because so often we see clients of ours testing, but they're not actually doing anything with that information that they've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just that's transported me back to like GCSE science, right? Because whenever there was like the whole method, the beginning and end was, you had the hypothesis, you had the method and the test, right? And then you had the conclusion. Right. And I think that's so important with A/B tests, is that you need to understand what you're testing and why. You have the method for doing so, and then you have the conclusion. You decide how long you're going to test for. You put an end to it, right? And then you put the results into action, because that's what, like you said, we see prospective clients, and sometimes current clients, when they're doing their own A/B tests as well, is that, why are we doing it here? Are we doing it just so that there's some metrics that we can nod at and say, oh, cool, that's interesting, or are we doing it so that we can make these incremental improvements into the performance of our email marketing? Because that's the hardest part, right, of our job. It's, we can get you some big wins quite quickly, but how do we make sure that your email marketing is always performing better? And it's about those small wins over the long period, right? It's about the incremental wins over time.
1% every day.
1% every day. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think when we talk about testing, most of the time we are talking about those marginal gains, those incremental tweaks, whether it's a word that you're using in your subject line versus not using it, or an emoji, or the way that you phrase a CTA. But there is another form of testing, and this is championed by a guy whose name I think is Matt Bazak. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is somewhat of a testing guru. He's like the guy if you're talking about email testing. And his whole approach is, okay, those incremental gains are all well and good, but let's be radical here and let's try two completely different emails. So maybe the first email we send has a completely different subject line, a completely different design. It's written in the first person by someone at the brand. It's really conversational, it's funny, it's maybe even a little bit rude. And we have that email with a CTA versus a much more branded corporate feel with a different design, a different subject line. And the idea is not simply to test, okay, does my audience respond to emojis more, or do they respond to no emojis? But instead it's, who are my audience really? Who do they actually want to hear from here? And asking bigger questions. So I would say, if you're starting testing, you should be starting with those small incremental ones, but there's no ceiling to how far we can go with this.
Sure.
And asking big existential questions about your audience can also be answered through testing. Although I would encourage anyone watching to use a big sample range if you are going to do a test like that. Don't just base it on the performance of one email. because there could be any number of variables that influence the outcome of a hypothesis as big as something like the tone of voice. So use a bigger sample size, judge it over time, and take a composite average of the results. I think that's really important as well.
Okay, nice. And if for the people watching, and I know there's at least 4 because we've both got our mums are watching. My wife, your girlfriend.
I'll probably pay a couple of people.
So that might be about 6 people watching. So in terms of, I think a word of warning for those people, mum, about A/B testing, is that I think people can sometimes be guilty of testing too many things at once. Right, I think that's fine for the chap that you mentioned there. Was it Matt?
I hope.
Yeah. Where he's really kind of testing the fundamentals, right? In terms of almost the existential level of testing is, who are my audience, what resonates with them. But if you say you wanted to test your click rate, for example, testing too many different elements at once clouds the results, so you don't know what it is that's actually impacted to your click rate. So you end up testing a number of things. Maybe it's the design, the copy. You test the subject line, which I wouldn't necessarily test if you were aiming to improve clicks anyway, but you test the CTA, you test the design of it, you test the copy of it. You do all these things all at once to try and improve your click rate. And then all of a sudden your click rate goes down. And you can't attribute that move, that change in your click rate to anything, because you don't know what it is that's affected it, right? So my word of warning for testing would be to decide, and we go back to this GCSE science thing where you have your hypothesis, you have the method for testing it, and then you have the conclusion, and then you move on to testing something else, right? And that is time consuming, but that's also why email marketing agencies exist, right? It's why we're able to afford to film a podcast, because people pay us to do that stuff, because it can be complex. But there is that entry level, kind of beginner level testing that people can do, which can still get some good wins, right?
You don't need a Bunsen burner or a Petri dish for email marketing testing either.
No.
There really is no barrier to entry as far as testing goes.
No.
Another quick test I want to mention, because it has sometimes transformative results. It has done for our clients, but anecdotally as well, there are studies online that reinforce this. Not always, but your from name, your sender name is a great A/B test. Are you sending from your brand, or are you sending from name at brand? And we're seeing a growing trend of, rather than just getting an email from Amazon, we're getting Mark at Amazon. And it's, hi, I'm Mark, the customer experience manager or something. And attributing a name, an actual human being, to your branded emails. You can still sell stuff, you can still talk about the company as a whole, but we all know that emails are written by people. Right? We know that it's not some vacuous entity constructing these emails, it's a person within that company doing it. And attributing that name can be really, really powerful for open rates and ultimately conversions as well, because as we know, people generally like to buy from other people. Creating a person-to-person relationship rather than a brand-person relationship can have significant impacts on open rate, on click rate, on conversions. Not all the time though. And again, this is why we test.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's a great point. Just going back to personalization, right? We talked about personalization in terms of the data that you're using from the subscriber, right? But also personalizing from the data that you have on your own company and how that's presented in the emails that you send, right? So that from name is super important. How are you taking the email to a personal level? How are you personalizing and testing different ways of doing that is great, especially if you don't know. We talked about generational differences in how people perceive personalization. And this is a great thing to test. If you don't know who makes up your list, if for some reason you don't know the demographic of your clients and your customers, you can't say for sure what's going to resonate with them. And we aren't naive or stupid enough to pretend that when we onboard a new client, we instantly know how to talk to their customers, right? There are so many things that we take into consideration, and that's why the onboarding process is there. And that's why the A/B testing process is there, because we know that we don't know everything when it comes to everyone's email list, right? So A/B testing exists so that we can get to know your clients, you'll get to know your list. And one thing that I like is that it's such a great way to get feedback from your list without ever having to ask them. It's a great way to conduct research. It's a great way to basically get your list to tell you how to contact them and what resonates with them. It's such a cheat code when it comes to email marketing. We've talked a little bit about beginners and people that are just kind of managing their own email marketing, doing testing. Where would it sit in kind of the list of priorities for different elements of email marketing? Because if people only have so much time to give to email marketing, should it be near the top? Should it be in the middle, do you think, somewhere? Or
I think it ought to be pretty high.
okay.
And the main reason for that is, as I've mentioned, the barrier to entry for testing is so low that it feels like you don't really have an excuse not to. I appreciate that we're all pushed for time, but testing doesn't even need to be a time-consuming activity. You know, the functionality that's built into these ESPs means that it's never been easier to run these tests.
It's very intuitive, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. So it just means if you're testing your subject line, okay, you're going to have to think of 2 different subject lines. But as we already said, that could just be the difference between using an emoji and not using an emoji.
Exactly.
We don't need to be doing anything too crazy here.
Yeah.
As much as Matt Bazak might encourage that, it's not something that we need to be doing, certainly not at an entry level if you've only just started testing.
Yeah.
So remember, as I said, every time you're sending an email, there's an opportunity there to learn something about your audience.
Yeah.
As you said, to get them to tell you something about themselves that you didn't already know.
Yeah.
And knowing your audience when it comes to email marketing is absolutely essential. So I would put it right up there with the really important stuff.
Yeah.
At some level.
Yeah.
I, at the same time, I would say don't stress about being too scientific with these tests. You know, don't worry about all right, if you can only test send time on one email because you're really strapped for time, that's still infinitely better than doing nothing at all. So yeah, you know, there's no need to be there's no need to write 2 completely separate emails, I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, nice. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse. Get onto it. Get yourself tested, folks. You know, because some of these tests, they're simple, and what you can learn from, you know, you just the last thing on testing here, because we talked about it quite a lot and we promised these folks we wouldn't talk about it too much, but I think, you know, if you're testing your subject line and you test 2 different ones and you've got one that's really humorous and witty and a bit more kind of personal, conversational, and you've got one that's more kind of branded and corporate and a bit more generic, right? And generic in terms of tone of voice. What that tells you, it tells you about subject lines, but it also tells you about the tone of voice. So if you do that test, it will tell you something about how you should write the copy of your email. So there you can be clever. If you're strapped for time, there's things that you can test that will tell you wider things about your audience. So if you're not sure how to write the copy in your email, test the copy in the subject line. That will give you some indication about how they want to be spoken to in the email as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And people feel like they really know their lists already because they have grown their lists usually. They feel that they have an intuitive understanding of them, and they well might. But until they've done that testing, they don't know for certain. They're only acting on instinct. And as you say, we would never come in on board a new client and assume to know how to speak to their list already. We would start from scratch. We might have ideas based on previous clients and previous testing we've done, but it might be a different industry. It might be a different size list. Every list is unique and different. And,
oh God.
And so you can look at all the internet studies you want, but what works for one list might not work for yours. So,
absolutely.
So treat each one with the respect it deserves and test on each.
Nice. I like that. Okay. That's testing done. Well done.
Testing done.